I woke up with my neck jammed against the seatbelt buckle and my hands so numb I had to rub them together before I could even grip my phone. The inside of the car smelled like stale coffee and damp cloth. The windshield was fogged from my breath, and when I wiped a clear spot with my sleeve, the lot lights outside looked smeared and tired. The fuel light on the dash had been on so long it didn't feel like a warning anymore. I opened my bank app and saw the number. That was enough. My stomach flipped, and I closed it before my brain could start arguing with reality. Missed calls and past due reminders sat in a neat stack under it. A message from my landlord waited at the top. I didn't open it because I already knew the tone. I'd parked in a back lot near the newer cargo roads, tucked in with trucks, because nobody looks twice at a car that seems like it belongs. The air back there was diesel and wet concrete. If you kept your head down, you could pretend you were just another night shift guy catching a few minutes before clocking in. I did the math anyway. Gas, food, rent. If I drove around chasing something better, I'd burn what I had left and end up right back here. There wasn't a smart option on the board anymore. There was just the option that kept me indoors tonight. My last job had started cutting my hours a month ago. The manager kept saying it was temporary. 1 week I had 3 shifts, the next week I had 1, and then I wasn't on the schedule at all. When I called, it went to voicemail. That was the whole goodbye. I scrolled job listings with one hand shoved inside my jacket sleeve. Most wanted interviews, references, daytime availability. I could do the work, but I couldn't play the whole game right now. I didn't have clean clothes for a sit-down interview, and I didn't have time to wait a week for a maybe. I needed something that paid fast. That's how I found it. Overnight shift at a lost baggage annex, pay per shift, start tonight, work alone, on-site cot during break. The work alone part made my skin tighten, but the cot line grabbed me harder. A place to sit that wasn't my driver's seat, a couple of hours where I could close my eyes without listening for someone to knock on the glass. I called before I could talk myself out of it. "Please state your full name," the automated voice said evenly. "Mason Rowe," I said, trying to sound normal. "Thank you, Mason Rowe," the automated voice said. It repeated my name like it was reading it off a file, clean and confident, no hesitation. I told myself it was just software. A warehouse job would be barcodes and paperwork and muscle memory. Boring work, safe work. I stared at the posting again and made myself a deal. Whatever checklist they handed me, I'd follow it. No ego, no shortcuts. I couldn't afford pride anymore, and I couldn't afford to lose the one door that had cracked open. I started the car, watched the fuel light blink, and pulled out behind the trucks, heading toward the address on fumes and stubbornness. I drove in before 8 p.m., but it didn't feel like I was heading toward an airport. The signs got smaller the farther I went, like they were meant for people who already knew the route. The main road peeled off into service lanes, then into an access road behind chain-link fences and stacks of pallets. Floodlights buzzed overhead, throwing tired yellow cones onto wet concrete. Everything back there smelled like diesel and rain, and the wind carried a constant distant roar that never quite broke into anything you could name. The GPS told me to turn where I wouldn't have turned on my own. The road curved away from the terminals and bright signage, away from moving crowds into a stretch of industrial quiet. The airport noise thinned out, replaced by a steady hum of fans and distant motors. It felt like I'd driven behind a stage into the part nobody sees unless they work there. The building was a plain concrete box, no logo, no reception entrance, one roll-up door, one side door. The windows were there, but they were dark in a way that didn't read as lights off. It read as sealed, like the inside had been told not to leak anything out. A security camera above the door blinked a tiny red light. steady and patient. I parked in a faded spot and sat for a second with my hands on the wheel. I reminded myself why I came. A paid shift, a cot, a chance to not sleep in my car tonight. The side door opened before I reached it, like someone had been watching a camera and timed it. A woman stood in the doorway with a clipboard, hair pulled back, shirt pressed, posture straight. Not warm, not rude, just focused, like she was halfway through a checklist and I was the next item. "You're Mason," Ms. Calder said without looking up. "Yeah, that's me," I said. She stepped aside and let me in. The air inside was cooler than outside, and the lighting was practical, aimed at work surfaces, leaving the corners dim. The sound wasn't loud, but it was constant. Fans, belts, motors, a low mechanical breath that never fully stops. It smelled like cardboard dust, cold metal, and something sharp and clean, like disinfectant that never quite fades. Ms. Calder moved fast, and I had to match her pace, which made it feel like I'd already started and was already behind. We passed the belt line first, a long conveyor running through the center of the space. Bins sat along it in taped rectangles, and the tape had layers like somebody kept remarking the same boundaries. Next was the scan station, a table with a mounted scanner, a scale, and a monitor facing the operator. Behind it sat a glass office, slightly raised like a control booth, smudges on the panels marked where people touched without thinking. Inside were 2 monitors, a chained pen, a logbook open to a fresh page, and a label printer sitting on the desk like it belonged there more than anyone did. "Badge is already made. Don't lose it," Ms. Calder said flatly. She handed me the badge. My name was printed clean, and the plastic felt warm, like it had been sitting near a machine. I clipped it to my jacket and tried not to think about how final that felt. At the far end was a freight elevator with dented metal doors and a worn call button. The indicator panel above it was simple, the kind that should have been reassuring. It still looked tired. The concrete near it sloped slightly, like the floor had settled over the years and nobody fixed it. I caught myself staring at the seams of the doors, the way the 2 halves met, then forced my eyes away. Then she led me to a steel mesh cage painted dull red. A heavy chain wrapped the door twice, and the lock was bulky and scratched, older than the rest of the hardware in the building. She didn't tell me what went in there. She didn't have to. The extra second she gave it with her eyes made it clear the cage mattered, and it mattered in a way I wasn't going to like. Cold hold was a plain door with a keypad. Ms. Calder called it temperature-controlled storage for items that couldn't sit out overnight. That explanation was normal enough that I grabbed onto it, but the keypad numbers weren't evenly worn. A few were faded more than the others, like the same digits got pressed over and over. It was the kind of detail I'd normally ignore, except my brain was already collecting them like receipts. Back in the glass office, the label printer made a squealing sound when it fed stock, like rubber dragging against something dry. The computer screens were on, but the dashboard looked half awake. Boxes, tabs, a queue, then blank fields where data should have been. It felt like a template, waiting for the right input to show the real version. I told myself it was because I wasn't signed in, because that explanation was easy and I needed easy. Ms. Calder tapped the logbook, then pointed at the wall clock above it. She said timestamps mattered more than details. I didn't understand that yet, but she said it like she'd learned it the hard way. And I believed her. The clock was an old analog one, loud enough that I could hear it under the fans. Tick, 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 like it wanted to be noticed. I asked who I should call if something went wrong. Fire, medical, break-in, normal questions. The way she answered didn't sound like a normal workplace answer. She didn't give me a reassuring chain of command or a number taped to the wall. She answered like she was trying to keep the question from expanding, like the wrong phrasing could invite the wrong kind of attention. She handed me a key ring with a couple of keys and a small fob and told me to keep it on me even in the bathroom. I nodded because I needed the job more than I needed an explanation. "You'll be here alone tonight," she added, like it was just a schedule note. That word sat heavy. I kept my face neutral. "If something feels off, write it down. Don't improvise," Ms. Calder said, trying to stay calm. She showed me where gloves and spare label rolls were stored, and where a small set of tweezers sat in a drawer near the logbook. Then she walked me back toward the office door like the tour was already over, like the rest I'd learned by doing. As we passed the desk, the label printer fed a blank strip of paper all by itself. It slid out slow, maybe an inch, maybe two, then stopped. Nobody touched it. Ms. Calder didn't flinch. She glanced at it, then looked away, like the printer was a dog begging for attention. The strip hung there, white and clean, and I had the unwanted thought that it wasn't blank because nothing happened. It was blank because it hadn't decided what to say yet. Ms. Calder stopped touring, shut the glass office door, and set her clipboard down like we were done pretending this was normal. She guided me into the booth, and the hum outside dulled into something softer and more focused. Up close, the office felt less like a place to sit and more like a checkpoint. The desk was clean in the center and worn on the edges. The logbook lay open to a fresh page, and the pen beside it was chained down like it couldn't be trusted to stay put. The wall clock above the monitors ticked with a sharp little snap, louder than it had any right to be. She set her clipboard down, reached into a folder, and dropped a single sheet of paper onto the desk. Not slid it, dropped it. The way you drop a contract when you don't want to talk about it, because talking turns it into a negotiation. The paper landed flat, perfectly squared with the edge of the desk, like she'd done it 100 times and wanted it to look the same every time. The header was printed in block letters, overnight procedures, non-negotiable. It didn't read like a friendly policy memo. It read like something written after a bad night, when somebody's report had to explain why a simple shift turned into a mess. I could almost see the invisible line behind it, the part that wasn't printed. This exists because someone got hurt. This exists because someone didn't listen. "I'm not explaining it. I'm telling you," Ms. Calder said, voice steady. I stared at the page and tried to keep my face neutral. The list started normal enough. Things I recognized from other jobs: log your counts, check the belt, keep the aisles clear, lock the red cage, nothing exciting. Then it slipped sideways. Not all at once, but in a way that made my brain hesitate. Use tweezers for loose tags. Do not answer the intercom with your name. Avoid looking at certain surfaces during certain minutes. The words were simple, but the feeling behind them wasn't. A lot of rules are written by people who've never done the work. These weren't like that. These were written by someone who knew exactly where you'd be standing and what you'd reach for without thinking. That's what bothered me. It wasn't the weirdness on the page, not yet. It was the confidence. The time windows were the loudest thing on the sheet. Not bolded, not underlined, but they punched through anyway. From 1:14 a.m. to 1:22 a.m., exactly at 2:41 a.m., from 3:33 a.m. to 3:39 a.m., and after 4:05 a.m., those weren't rounded times. Those weren't normal checks. They were too specific to be random. My brain tried to rescue itself with an explanation I could live with. Systems test schedule, alarm checks, conveyor calibration, something on a timer, something that clicked over automatically. I'd seen maintenance routines before, and I'd seen supervisors who got weird about people messing with them. If I could make it that, if I could tuck it into a normal box, the rest would feel manageable. But Ms. Calder didn't give me room to cling to it. She watched my eyes track the times like she already knew where I'd stop. She didn't look nervous. She looked determined, like she was making sure I took the warning the way it was meant. "Can I at least ask why the time windows are that specific?" I asked, trying to stay calm. She didn't answer the question. Not directly. She didn't correct me either. She just shifted the focus back to the part that mattered to her, the part she wanted locked into my head before she left the building. "Read the time windows back to me," Ms. Calder insisted. I did it, even though it felt ridiculous. I read them out loud, slow and careful, like I was reciting a passcode. From 1:14 a.m. to 1:22 a.m., exactly at 2:41 a.m., from 3:33 a.m. to 3:39 a.m., and after 4:05 a.m. The more I said them, the more they stopped being numbers and started being rules that would show up whether I wanted them to or not. She pointed at the intercom line with the tip of her pen, tapping once, then again. The pen chain rattled softly, a small metallic sound that made the room feel tighter. "After 4:05 a.m., you don't answer with your name. Ever," she said quietly. That was the first time her voice softened. Not into kindness exactly, into something closer to caution, like she wasn't worried about me understanding. She was worried about me forgetting for 1 second when I was tired. I felt my throat tighten, and I didn't like that my body reacted before my brain could argue. I didn't like that the rule sounded like it belonged in a horror movie, and she was saying it like it belonged in a workplace. I looked at the open logbook again. The blank lines waited like they were already expecting my handwriting. The chained pen waited like it had watched people write the same kind of entries before. The clock kept snapping out each second, steady and impatient. The whole setup made it feel like I'd stepped into someone else's routine, and I was being asked to wear it like a uniform. Ms. Calder slid the paper toward me and held her hand still, not hovering, not pushing, just waiting for the next step to happen. "Sign it," Ms. Calder said. I hesitated for half a beat, not because I thought I could refuse, because signing made it real, because the whole reason I was here was that I couldn't afford to be picky. And I hated that truth more than I hated the rules. Then I picked up the chained pen and signed my name in the space at the bottom, pressing harder than I needed to. She took the sheet back immediately, like she didn't want it sitting with me too long. She slid it into a folder she didn't label, closed it, and tucked it under her arm with the clipboard. Then she turned to go, and the office suddenly felt larger without her in it, like the room had been held together by her presence. When the door clicked shut behind her, the ticking clock jumped to the front of everything. It wasn't louder, not really. I was just listening now, because I didn't have anything else to listen to. At 9 p.m., I sat down at the desk in the glass office and opened the logbook like it was the only solid thing in the building. The page was clean, the lines straight, and the pen chain clicked softly when I pulled it closer. I wrote the basics first, the kind of entries every warehouse expects. Belt status, operational. Scanner status, operational. Doors secured, checked. Cold hold closed, confirmed. I kept my handwriting tight and neat, like neat handwriting could make the night behave. When I finished the first line, I stared at it for a second longer than I needed to, because it felt good to see something I'd done that was simple and correct. I looked at the wall clock, then back at the page, then at the clock again. It wasn't that I didn't trust my phone. It was that my phone felt like it belonged to my old life, the one where I could ignore calls and pretend my problems would wait. The clock on that wall didn't care what I believed. It just moved forward, one sharp tick at a time, and everything in this place seemed built around that fact. I stood up and did the routine Ms. Calder had walked me through, step by step, no shortcuts. I ran the belt test first, watching the conveyor move empty, listening for squeals or slips. The rollers turned with a steady rhythm that sounded normal enough. I checked the emergency stop, pressed it, watched the belt halt, then reset it and started the belt again, just to make sure I understood the sequence. I wiped down the scanner glass with a clean rag until the surface stopped showing smudges, because scanners lie when they're dirty, and the last thing I needed was a bad read that put me behind schedule. The normal work calmed me down. It gave my hands a job and my brain something concrete to hold. I moved to the staging area and pulled a small pile of unclaimed bags into the scan station one at a time. The first few were easy, the kind of luggage you see everywhere. A soft duffel with a torn zipper seam, a hard-shell suitcase with airline stickers peeling at the corners, a kid's backpack with a keychain clipped to the strap. I scanned each tag, weighed the bag, printed a routing label, and slid it into the right bin. Scan, weigh, tag, bin. I wrote a timestamp in the log after each batch, not because I understood why it mattered, but because Ms. Calder had said it did. The act of recording time made the work feel organized, like I was stacking something messy into clean rows. After a few rounds, I found a rhythm, and rhythm is a dangerous kind of comfort. It makes you believe the next hour will look like the last hour. I kept the timestamps tight, mostly to prove to myself I was moving forward. The belt moved, the scanner beeped the way it was supposed to, the bins filled the way bins fill when the world is ordinary. I tried not to look at the windows, because the darkness behind them still bothered me. I tried not to look too long at the freight elevator, because I didn't like the way its doors sat there like a mouth that didn't have to open unless it wanted to. When I passed the printer in the glass office, it fed out a tiny strip of label stock and stopped. No print, just a white tongue hanging out of the machine like it had started to say something and changed its mind. I stared at it for a second, waiting for another inch to slide out, waiting for any sign that it was part of the work I was doing. Nothing happened. I tore the strip off, balled it in my fist, and tossed it into the trash. The motion felt irritated, like I was scolding an object for being weird. Then I washed that irritation down with logic. Old printer, feeding issue, humidity, normal. I said those words in my head and treated them like a receipt I could keep. I forced myself to do the checks on schedule. I walked to the red cage and tested the lock with my hand, not enough to rattle it, just enough to confirm it was secure. The chain was cold in a way that didn't match the room temperature, like it had been pulled out of a freezer. I flexed my fingers after I let go and told myself metal stays cold longer. And that was all it was. Still, I didn't like how the chain felt against my skin. It made me think of being outside too long in winter. The moment you touch a railing and the cold is so sharp, it feels like a burn. I went back to the scan station and kept working. I ran another batch through, then another. Every time I looked up, the glass office reflected the work area behind me, and I caught myself checking that reflection more than I should have, not because I expected to see anything, because the reflection gave me a second angle, and second angles are what you rely on when you're alone. At some point, the place settled into a quiet that didn't match the hours. It wasn't dead silent. The fans still ran. The belt still hummed when it moved. But around midnight, the building got quieter in a way I couldn't quantify. It felt like the sound had been turned down without the machines actually stopping. Like the space between noises had gotten bigger. In that bigger space, every little sound stood out. The squeak of my shoes, the click of the pen chain, the small snap of the wall clock as it moved. Even my breathing sounded too loud, like I was interrupting something. I went back into the glass office and picked up the intercom handset because the procedure sheet had mentioned checking in. It felt silly to announce myself to an empty building, but I was trying to do things by the book. I pressed the button and waited for the little crackle that meant the line was open. Northgate Annex overnight log. "Mason Rowe on duty," I said into the intercom. "Just following procedure." There was a pause that was shorter than it should have been, like the response was already waiting. "Copy that," the speaker voice replied, too quick, too clean. I stared at the intercom for a second after the line went quiet. It wasn't what it said. It was how it said it. No background noise, no radio fuzz, no hint of another person's breath. Just words, delivered like a receipt printing cleanly. I tried to let it go because the truth was, I didn't need the voice to sound human. I needed it to exist, because an answer meant there was someone, somewhere, connected to this place. An answer meant I wasn't completely alone. I went back out and started another round of sorting. The work was steady, and for a while, steady was enough. I handled bags without thinking too much about who they belonged to. A suitcase with a cracked wheel that would make someone swear at baggage claim. A garment bag that still smelled faintly like cologne. A tote with a tag that had been printed over twice, the name and flight number darkened where the printer had hit the same spot again. Each item felt like evidence of normal life happening somewhere else. Passengers complaining, flights landing late, families getting home. It was almost comforting, like the lost baggage proved the world was still spinning. Then the scanner beeped once when nothing was under it. It wasn't a loud beep, but it was clear, the same tone it made when it successfully read a tag. My eyes snapped to the scanner head. The table was empty. My hands were empty. The belt behind me was still. The monitor didn't change. No red warning, no error message, no ghost barcode on the screen. Just the beep, then nothing. I waited, holding still, listening for another sound that would explain it. A vibration from the belt, a piece of loose label stock brushing the scanner. Anything, nothing came. The air stayed thick with that weird midnight quiet, and my skin felt too tight across my shoulders. I walked closer and waved my hand under the scanner like I was trying to trigger it on purpose. It didn't react. I tapped the table. Nothing. I looked for a stray tag stuck to the edge of the surface. Nothing. I forced myself to breathe through my nose and not through my mouth, like that would make me calmer. I wrote it down anyway, not because I thought someone would read it and care, but because Ms. Calder had been clear. If something feels off, write it down. Don't improvise. I didn't know if a random beep counted as off. In that moment, it did. The logbook felt like a boundary line. If I put the weirdness on paper, it stayed on paper. That was the hope, at least. I did a walkthrough to reset my head. I checked cold hold first. The door was shut, the handle firm, the keypad dark. I didn't touch it beyond confirming it was closed. I moved to the freight elevator and looked at the indicator. Dock level, the ground floor by the loading bay. Simple, normal. I stared at it longer than I needed to, then told myself I was just being careful. I checked the exits, secured. I checked the red cage again, chain tight, lock firm. I ran my fingers along the edge of the mesh without thinking, then pulled my hand back fast like the cage might bite. Back at the desk, I tried to eat something. A granola bar that had been in my glove compartment long enough to taste like the plastic wrapper. I drank water from a bottle that was too warm. I kept glancing at the wall clock because it anchored me. The clock didn't change its pace when the scanner beeped. It didn't hesitate when the building went quiet. It kept ticking in the same stubborn way, and that made it feel more honest than my phone, more honest than my thoughts. I caught myself counting the ticks between sips. I hated that I was doing that, because it felt like the start of panic. A faint smell drifted through the glass office and then faded, like it couldn't decide whether to commit. Warm plastic, maybe. Or hot dust. The kind of smell you get when a device has been running too long, when insulation heats up, when a motor strains. I stood up and checked the label printer. It looked normal. No lights blinking out of sequence, no heat radiating off it. The label roll sat in place. The printer didn't squeal. It didn't feed paper. It just sat there like an innocent tool. I checked the monitor cables out of habit. Everything was plugged in. Everything looked fine. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. I went back out and watched the belt. I ran it for a few seconds, then stopped it, then started it again just to hear the sound change. The conveyor moved empty, and in the movement there was a weird illusion, like it was carrying weight that wasn't visible. The belt dipped slightly at one point and then leveled out. It could have been wear. It could have been a seam in the material. It could have been my eyes. I stared until my vision did that thing where it starts to blur and then overcorrect. I stopped the belt and listened to the room settle again. I forced myself back into the work. I did another batch. Scan, weigh, tag, bin, log. I kept the timestamps tight, because tight timestamps made the night feel measurable. Measurable meant manageable. I told myself that if I stayed busy, nothing could sneak up on me. That's what people always tell themselves when they're alone in a place they don't fully trust. Stay busy, keep moving, don't think too much. But the quiet kept returning in waves, and every time it did, I felt like the building was waiting for me to stop, waiting for me to listen, waiting for me to make room for something that wasn't part of the job. I tried not to give it that room. I kept writing in the logbook, I kept checking locks, I kept wiping surfaces that were already clean. I kept my keys in my pocket, heavy against my leg like a reminder. By the time the night settled deeper, my shoulders ached from holding tension I didn't notice I had. The normal tasks still calmed me, but they didn't erase the feeling that the place had its own rhythm and I was just borrowing space inside it. I looked at the wall clock again and told myself the same thing I'd told myself in the car. It's just a shift. Barcodes, paperwork, a warehouse. I said it like a prayer and I hated that it sounded like one. At 1:13 a.m., I caught myself staring at the label printer like it was about to do something. Not the belt, not the elevator, the printer. It sat there quiet, status light steady, and I was waiting for it to move. The second I realized it, it pissed me off. I hated that my attention had narrowed down to a machine on a desk. I forced my eyes onto the logbook and read my own entries like they belonged to someone else. Belt test, emergency stop, walkthrough, one weird scanner beep. A note about the printer feeding a blank strip earlier. Everything sounded normal on paper, which was the whole point. I told myself I was fine. Then the printer made that strained squeal and started feeding label stock. No prompt, no job cue. The monitors didn't change. It just printed, steady and confident, like it had been waiting for that minute. I looked at the wall clock first because the clock was the only thing that didn't argue. The hands were inside the window, from 1:14 a.m. to 1:22 a.m., right on time, like the rule was a schedule and the printer was obeying it. The strip slid out a few inches and stopped, hanging there like it wanted me to read it. I could see faint dark lines through the plastic window. It had put ink on the label. My brain tried to save it with logic. Old printer, stuck job. A maintenance script that runs whether you're ready or not. I even started to reach for the keyboard, like I could pull up a print queue and clear it. Then I remembered the wording. It didn't say, clear the queue. It said, don't read it, put it away. That kind of rule isn't about equipment. It's about you. I stood up slowly, because moving fast would have meant I was scared, and I wasn't ready to admit that. I walked to the desk and pinched the strip at the very end. The label stock felt warm. I tore it off in one clean pull and folded it immediately, printed side inward, tight, neat, no peek. I held it in my fist for a second, feeling the edges press into my palm. The misprint tray was a cheap plastic bin with faded marker on the front. I opened it, dropped the folded strip inside, and shut the lid. The click sounded sharp in the quiet. I kept my eyes on the lid like it might spring open on its own. I told myself I was being ridiculous, then caught myself listening for the printer to start again. It stayed quiet. I could feel the room paying attention, and I hated myself for even thinking that. I needed to move. Not run, just move, to keep my head from locking up on that desk. I stepped out of the glass office. The warehouse air was cooler out there, and the hum of the building felt wider, like it filled every corner. I took a short loop past the scan station. Then I saw the bag tag in the hallway. It lay near the corner that led toward cold hold, blank white side up, flat, clean, placed. My first instinct was automatic, almost comforting. Pick it up, flip it, fix the problem. My hand started to reach, then stopped in midair. No direct touch. Use tweezers. Quarantine bag. The rule snapped into place like a seatbelt locking. I stood there, annoyed at myself for hesitating, and also annoyed at the building for putting me in a spot where I had to hesitate. It was just a tag. It should have been nothing, but it matched a line on a paper I'd signed. That made it feel like bait. I turned around and went back to the office, keeping my pace normal so I didn't look like I was running from paper. The tweezers were in the drawer, Ms. Calder pointed out, cheap stainless steel, next to a stack of small zip bags. I grabbed one bag and the tweezers, then shut the drawer with my hip. Back in the hallway, I crouched and pinched the tag at a corner with the tweezers. It felt stiff, thicker than a normal baggage tag should be. I dropped it into the zip bag and sealed it until it snapped shut. The moment it sealed, the tag shifted inside. Not a jump. A slow rotation, deliberate, like it was trying to show me the printed side. My eyes followed it before I could stop them. I hated that. That was the whole trap, right there. Attention. I held the bag at arm's length, then forced myself to look away and carry it back to the desk. I set it in the quarantine spot and turned it so the blank side faced up. The tag inside shifted again, subtle, like a reminder that the back still existed and it wanted to be seen. I didn't open it. I didn't touch the zipper. I sat down and wrote the whole thing in the log. Time, location, condition, action taken. I wrote it like an incident report, plain and boring, because boring was safer. The logbook felt like a boundary line. If I put it on paper, it stayed on paper. Then I heard a soft ding from the freight elevator. I froze with the pen still in my hand. I listened for doors opening. I listened for wheels. Nothing followed. I stood, walked toward the elevator at a careful pace, and stopped a few feet back. The indicator read, dock level. It should have reassured me. It didn't. If it was already at dock level, why ding? My brain wanted me to solve it, press the button, check the seam, lean in, confirm. That word kept showing up like it was stuck in my head. I didn't do any of that. I backed away, went back to the office, and logged the ding like it was a normal equipment note. I tried to get back to the routine after that. I walked the belt line without turning it on, checking for anything that could have triggered a read. I checked the scan table for a loose tag stuck under the lip. Nothing. I checked the office glass and saw only my own reflection and the dim warehouse behind me. I hated how often I used the glass like a second set of eyes. Being alone does that. Back at the desk, I drank a mouthful of water and tasted plastic from the bottle. I stared at the misprint tray and forced myself not to open it. The urge wasn't loud, but it was steady, like an itch. I kept telling myself the same thing. The rule doesn't care why. It only cares whether you obey. When I finished, I sat still and tried to talk myself down. The printer ran and I didn't read it. The tag showed up and I didn't touch it. The elevator dinged and I didn't chase it. Small tests passed clean. Nothing bad happened. I should have felt proud. Instead, I felt like I'd just shown the building I could follow instructions. It didn't feel like safety. It felt like training. The intercom crackled once, soft like a line opening. "Confirm claim," the intercom voice said evenly. My mouth went dry. The easiest thing in the world would have been to answer, just to make the moment normal again. I swallowed and forced my voice flat, like I was talking to a wrong call at a normal job. "I can't help you with claims. You'll need the airline," I said, trying to sound bored. I waited for the line to drop. I waited for a confused person to ask where they were. I waited for the phrase to reveal itself as a glitch. Nothing changed. "Confirm claim," the voice repeated, a little closer. The second one sounded wrong in a way I can't explain. Same speaker, same phrase, but the distance felt different, like the room itself had leaned in. I didn't answer again. I kept my hands flat on the desk, fingers spread, so I couldn't reach for anything without noticing. I wrote the intercom call down. Exact phrasing. My response, the repeat. I underlined the time without meaning to, just once. When I set the pen down, my fingers were shaking. I pressed my palm to the desktop until it stopped. Sitting there, staring at neat lines of ink, I understood what the rules were really doing. They weren't protecting my body from getting hurt. They were protecting my attention. They were teaching me what not to look at, what not to touch, what not to confirm. And the worst part was how badly a part of me wanted to break them, just to feel in control again. After 2 a.m., the intercom started coming alive more often, and the gaps between calls got shorter in a way that felt intentional. It wasn't like a normal glitch that repeats on a fixed loop. It was the same phrase, but the pacing changed each time, like something was trying different angles. Sometimes it came quick, like a reminder you were supposed to already know. Sometimes it came slow, like it expected you to lean closer. I kept working because work was the only thing that made my hands feel useful. I ran a couple of bags through the station, logged the weights, and moved them into bins. I checked the logbook like it could tell me whether I was overreacting. The ink didn't help. The clock kept ticking, and the building kept humming. Every sound that should have been background noise felt like it was waiting to become a signal. The intercom crackled again, and this time, it didn't stop at the phrase. It added information. The last 4 digits of my phone number, spoken the way a customer service system reads back a confirmation, calm and exact. My skin went cold under my shirt. I stood there staring at the wall speaker like it could see me staring back. I told myself it was impossible. I told myself the system probably had my number from the job posting. That was a normal explanation, and I tried to hold on to it. Then it added an old address I hadn't used in years. Not the one on my current license, not the apartment I'd just gotten pushed out of. The one before that, a place I'd left quietly, the kind of address you don't bring up unless you have to. Hearing it in that room felt like somebody had reached into my pocket and pulled out something I didn't know I was carrying. It wasn't just creepy. It was personal in a way systems aren't supposed to be. I pulled out my phone and called Ms. Calder. I needed a human voice, even a tired one. I needed someone to tell me this was a known problem with a dumb explanation and that I should keep doing my job. The call rang once, then cut off like the line got yanked out of the wall. I stared at my screen, confused for a second, then tried again. 1 ring. Cut. No voicemail. No missed call record that made sense. Just a clean stop, like the building didn't want the call to exist. I stood there with my thumb hovering over her contact, and I realized what I was doing. I was looking for permission, and I was looking for someone to tell me what counted as real. and the longer I stood there, the more I could feel the night trying to turn my hesitation into a decision. I went back to the only thing that had been reliable so far, the rules. I didn't like them, but they were the closest thing I had to a plan. I checked the page in my head and latched onto the next time marker like it was a rope. At 2:40 a.m., I went to check the elevator because the rule said 2:41 a.m. mattered. I wanted one clean, correct action that didn't require interpretation. Something I could do exactly the way I'd been told. The walk to the freight elevator felt longer than it had earlier, even though the building hadn't changed shape. The corridor light seemed a little dimmer, or maybe my eyes were tired. The floor slope near the doors felt more noticeable. I stopped a few feet back and watched the indicator panel as the minute rolled over. At exactly 2:41 a.m., the elevator indicator wasn't at dock level. It was one floor up. My stomach did that slow drop you get when you miss a step on stairs. I hadn't touched the call button. I hadn't heard the elevator move. There was no rumble, no mechanical groan, no warning beep. It was just wrong. Like reality had updated in the background, and nobody asked permission. The rule said to log it, then leave. That wording mattered now. It didn't say to investigate. It didn't say to call maintenance. It didn't say to press the button and bring it back down. It told me to record what I saw and get away from it, like the act of staying was the danger, not the equipment itself. I walked back to the office fast without running, grabbed the chained pen and wrote it down. Time, floor, and the fact that I did not press any buttons. My handwriting was ugly because my hand wanted to shake. I finished the line, put the pen down, and forced myself to follow the next part. Leave. Don't hover. Don't watch it. Don't get curious. I stepped out of the office and started walking away from the elevator area like I had a reason to be somewhere else. The moment I turned my back, I heard a louder ding. The doors didn't open. There was no follow-up sound. It was just the ding, clean and bright, like someone snapping their fingers to get your attention. Every part of my body wanted to turn around. That's what humans do. When something calls to you, you look. When something chimes behind you, you confirm it. I felt the pull in my neck, the instinct to pivot and face the sound. I clenched my jaw and kept walking, eyes forward, pace steady. I hated how hard that was. I hated that ignoring it felt like an effort I could measure. Back at the scan station, the belt was still, and the work area looked normal for half a second. Then I saw the suitcase. A hard case sat at the end of the belt where I hadn't put anything. It wasn't rolling in. It wasn't wobbling like it had just arrived. It was just there, parked squarely like it had always been part of the layout. The handle was down. The shell looked new enough to still have shine, but the corners were scuffed, like it had been through too many hands too quickly. I stood still and stared at it, waiting for my brain to catch up. I looked at the belt behind it. Empty. I looked at the staging area. Nothing missing. I looked down at my hands like I might be holding something I forgot about. My pulse was loud in my ears, and I didn't like that my body was doing that. I didn't like that the room felt like it got quieter around the suitcase. The label on the case said, "Final Route," but something about it made my eyes reject it. The print was wrong. The font was off by just enough that it looked like a counterfeit trying to pass as official. The edges were misaligned, like the label had been cut with dull scissors. A normal worker would have called it a bad print and reprinted it. A normal worker would have slapped a new label over it and moved on. But I wasn't in a normal shift anymore. The scanner screen flickered, and the interface that had looked half awake earlier suddenly looked sharp. A prompt filled the center of the monitor, clean and official, like a task I'd missed. "Scan to clear queue," the screen prompt insisted. I hadn't touched the keyboard. I hadn't clicked anything. The prompt was there anyway, demanding an action like it was the only reasonable next step. My mouth went dry, and I could feel my brain splitting into two tracks. One track wanted to obey because obedience is easy. Obedience makes the discomfort stop. The other track remembered Ms. Calder's voice, remembered the rules as a boundary line, and understood that the prompt was part of the trap. The rules told me what to do with suspicious items. Push it toward the red cage, lock it, log it, don't scan it, don't confirm it, don't play along. I grabbed a dolly and slid it under the suitcase without lifting the handle. The case shifted with a dull thump, heavier than it looked. I pushed it toward the red cage in a straight line. Keeping my eyes on the wheels like that somehow made it safer. The prompt stayed on the screen, bright and patient, like it could wait all night for me to give up. As I got closer to the cage, the intercom crackled again. The building didn't feel like it was talking from a distance anymore. It felt like it was talking from right behind my shoulder. "Confirm claim, Mason Rowe," the intercom voice said calmly. Hearing my name in that tone made my stomach twist. Not angry, not threatening. Calm. Like it was a customer service rep waiting for the caller to stop being difficult. Like my name belonged to it, and it was simply using the correct field. I stopped the dolly a few feet from the cage and forced myself to remember the rule. After 4:05 a.m., don't answer with your name. Ever. Hurry. I checked the clock in my head and realized it didn't matter whether it was after that minute yet. The rule had already been tested. The point wasn't the exact time anymore. The point was the habit. "I'm employee 1187, I said, trying to stay calm. The words came out flat, but I could hear the strain underneath them. I kept my hands on the dolly handles, knuckles tight, like if I let go I might do something stupid. The prompt on the screen didn't change. The suitcase didn't move. The building didn't ease up the way it does when you give it the answer at once. "That's not a valid response," the voice said, almost patient. Patience was worse than anger. Anger would have meant I had a chance to bargain. Patience meant it could wait me out. It could let me stand there, sweating, until my need for relief outweighed my need to be right. I stared at the red cage. The chain hung loose beside the lock, ready to be wrapped. The lock looked heavy enough to make a satisfying click when it snapped shut. My body wanted that click. It wanted a physical end to the moment. The problem was, the cage wasn't the end. The prompt wasn't going away. The intercom wasn't going quiet. The system had already decided the next action, and it was trying to make me perform it willingly. I pushed the dolly the last few feet, lined the suitcase up with the cage door, and reached for the chain. The metal felt cold against my fingers. I started wrapping it, slow and careful, trying to keep my breathing steady. If I could get it locked, maybe the system would accept that as a resolution. Maybe it would move on to the next item, the next task, the next shift. The prompt stayed on the monitor, bright, unmoved. My eyes flicked to the scan station without me meaning to. The scanner sat there waiting, and the longer it waited, the more it felt like it was waiting for me, not the luggage. My brain tried one last normal explanation. Maybe the prompt was real. Maybe the system needed a scan to clear some queue, and the rules were just an overreaction. Maybe Ms. Calder was paranoid. Maybe the intercom was just a buggy automated line. Maybe I could scan the label and it would throw an error, and I could log it and be done. Maybe it would prove I was in control again. That was the moment I stopped thinking like a worker and started thinking like someone trying to win a private argument with a building. I walked back to the scan station, slow enough to pretend I was still choosing. I picked up the scanner with one hand and held it above the suitcase label without touching anything else, like I could do it halfway and not count. My heart was beating too hard for how quiet the room was. My fingers were tight around the scanner grip. I told myself I would scan once, see what code it threw, and stop. That was all. A quick check. A proof. The prompt stayed on the screen, like it was watching. I brought the scanner closer until the red light touched the misaligned label. The beep sounded different. It wasn't the usual crisp confirmation tone. It was deeper, longer, like a satisfied exhale. The hair on my arms rose again, and my stomach dropped because my body recognized the sound as approval. The label printer in the glass office whirred, then squealed, then started feeding stock with the confidence it had at 1:14 a.m. The strip slid out, and this time I didn't have to wonder whether it printed something. The ink was bold enough to see from where I stood. The printer cut the label and let it hang, like it wanted me to come take it. I walked to the desk without thinking, and my hands were moving like they'd been trained. I tore it off, unfolded it without meaning to, and saw the words laid down in clean black type. Claimant, Mason Row. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. The room felt suddenly smaller, like the building had stepped closer. I stared at the label until the letters stopped looking like ink and started looking like a decision. I'd followed the rules all night, and it hadn't stopped the system from calling my name. The second I broke one rule, it didn't punish me right away. It rewarded me. It stamped me, clean and official, like the moment I obeyed, I became a valid entry. I stood there with that fresh label in my hand, and I knew I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. After that label printed, time stopped feeling like something I tracked and started feeling like something that hunted me. I tried to keep working because the work was the only excuse I had to move, but every time I looked at the logbook, my eyes snagged on the word claimant in my head, like it had been branded behind my eyelids. I washed my hands in the small sink, even though they weren't dirty, and the water ran cold enough to sting. I wiped my palms on my jeans and told myself it was just ink on adhesive paper. It didn't mean anything. It couldn't. The wall clock didn't care what I believed. It kept snapping out seconds, clean and exact, and I watched the hands crawl toward 3:33 a.m., like I was waiting for weather. I didn't want to do the next rule. I didn't want to stand at the glass and stare down like a kid being punished. I didn't want to participate in whatever ritual this place had built. But the idea of not doing it felt worse, like skipping it would be an admission that I had no plan left at all. So when the minute hit, I stepped to the office glass and put myself where the rules wanted me. From 3:33 a.m. to 3:39 a.m., I stood with my shoulders tight and my eyes fixed on the concrete by my boots. I could see the faint scuffs on the floor, old tape residue, a dark stain that looked like spilled coffee. The angle was wrong, on purpose. It forced my focus down. It forced me not to scan the room like a human does when they feel unsafe. The rule wasn't protecting me from anything physical. It was controlling what I was allowed to know. The first thing I noticed was shoes. Polished black shoes on the other side of the glass, close enough that I should have heard steps, close enough that I should have heard breath. Cargo lots are loud even at night. Gravel crunches, jackets rustle, footsteps echo off metal doors. I heard nothing. The shoes were just there, perfectly still, toes pointed toward the glass like whoever wore them had been standing in that exact spot for a long time. I kept my eyes down, but my vision still caught movement at the edge. The floodlights outside didn't match the shadow. The shadow fell the wrong way, leaning toward me as if the light source was behind my back, inside the office instead of outside in the lot. My skin tightened across my shoulders. I wanted to lift my head and look straight at it. That urge was so strong it felt physical, like a hand under my chin trying to raise it. I didn't lift my head, I stared harder at the concrete, and I tried to breathe like I wasn't holding my breath. The glass fogged fast, not slowly like it does in winter when you stand close. Fast, like someone exhaled warm breath onto it from the other side. The fog spread in an oval, low on the pane, right where I was forced to look. Letters formed in the mist, the way you write on a car window with your fingertip. The strokes were clean, confident, and too quick to be my imagination filling in gaps. Names appeared in a list, one under another. Some looked like passenger names, the kind you'd see on luggage tags. Some looked like employee IDs, short blocks of digits that made my stomach twist because they looked like the kind of code you'd be assigned, not the kind you'd choose. Then my name showed up last. It didn't appear like the others. It arrived like a signature, heavier, more deliberate, as if whoever was writing wanted that one to linger. I felt my throat tighten, and my hands curled into fists at my sides to keep them from reaching up and wiping the glass clean. That was another urge, another trap. Wipe it away, erase it, confirm it, engage with it, anything to feel like I was doing something. The belt kicked on by itself behind me. The sudden mechanical hum was loud in the quiet, and it made me flinch. Suitcases thumped and skidded as the conveyor ran, even though I hadn't staged anything there. Zippers snapped like little gunshot pops. Loose tags whipped through the air, slapped against metal rails, and one of them caught my knuckles. The cut was thin and sharp, like a paper cut made out of metal. I sucked in a breath and kept my eyes down, because the second I looked up felt like the second I would lose. More tags flew. The little plastic edges sliced, shallow but fast. My hands started to sting in multiple places at once, and the pain made my brain feel clearer for half a second. Pain is simple. Pain is honest. The rest of it wasn't. The freight elevator groaned, a deep grinding sound like gears waking up angry. Then it dinged, louder than before, and the ding didn't feel like a notification anymore. It felt like a signal the whole building recognized. The fans, the belts, the lights, the intercom, everything seemed to sync around that sound, like it was the center of the clock. The intercom crackled, and the voice changed. It wasn't testing me anymore. It wasn't repeating the same phrase with different pacing. It sounded tired of pretending this was a normal system, tired of giving me chances to play dumb. These rules aren't safety, they're onboarding, the intercom voice said, tired of pretending. The sentence landed hard because it fit everything I'd been trying not to admit. The rules weren't there to keep me from getting hurt. They were there to teach me what to do. Stand here, look down, don't say your name, scan when prompted, confirm when told, obey. The place wasn't trying to kill me, it was trying to process me. The belt ran harder, and a suitcase slammed into the rail with a sound that made the glass vibrate. The fogged names shivered, but they didn't disappear. My name stayed. The shoes stayed. The wrong shadow stayed. My hands stung, and I could feel warm blood mixing with the cold air. I went for the CO2 extinguisher on the wall because it was the first tool I could grab that didn't require thought. I ripped it free, and the metal handle was so cold it burned my palm. I aimed at the scan station first and squeezed. White fog blasted out, loud and violent, and it flooded the air with freezing vapor. The room filled fast, and my breath turned into a sharp cough. I swung the nozzle toward the office door seam and blasted along the edges, trying to blind whatever sensors were watching, trying to cover the glass, trying to break the clean lines of sight that made this place feel like it could see everything. For a second, it worked. The label printer whirred like it was about to feed paper, then stalled with a strangled squeal. The belt hesitated, stuttering like it lost its rhythm. The hum of the fans changed pitch, and the intercom hissed with a burst of static. The fog on the glass smeared, and the letters blurred at the edges like wet ink. I didn't wait to see if it would recover. I lunged for the emergency stop and slapped it hard enough to sting my palm. The belt cut off, and the sudden silence made my ears ring. I bolted for the dock exit, keys in my fist, lungs burning from the cold vapor, shoes slipping on damp concrete. Behind me, the voice came again, calm in the way paperwork is calm. No threats, no yelling, no anger, just procedure, like I was already a file being moved from one folder to another. "Claim received," the voice added, almost satisfied. I fumbled the lock with shaking hands and forced the key in. "Return to station," it said, like it was issuing a routine order. The words hit the back of my neck like a hand, trying to turn me around. I didn't turn. "No," I said, and my voice came out thin. I shoved the door open and ran into the night air, not looking back at the glass, not looking at the shoes, not giving the building the one thing it kept asking for: confirmation. I got to my car shaking so hard I missed the ignition twice. My fingers didn't feel like they belonged to me, and the keys kept slipping, clinking against the steering column like a cheap alarm. When the engine finally turned over, I didn't sit there to breathe. I didn't look back at the building. I just drove. I followed the access road out of the cargo area and didn't slow down until the floodlights were behind me and the fences stopped looking like they could reach through the windows. I didn't feel safe when I hit the main road. I didn't feel safe when I saw other cars. I only started to feel anything like relief when the lights thinned out and the industrial hum faded into normal highway noise. Even then, my shoulders stayed up around my ears, like my body didn't believe me yet. I pulled into a gas station lot and parked crooked, too close to the curb. I sat with my hands locked on the wheel and stared at the thin cuts on my knuckles. They stung when the heat kicked on. The cuts were so shallow they felt insulting, like the building hadn't even needed to hurt me properly to get my attention. I flexed my fingers and watched the skin pull tight. No deep wounds, no proof. Just little lines that looked exactly like what they were. Accidents from working too fast around sharp plastic and metal. When I finally looked over at the passenger seat, I saw a fresh label stuck to the front of my hoodie. It was right where a name tag would go, centered like someone placed it neatly. I didn't print it. I didn't touch the printer. The ink was crisp, the edges clean, and it read like a status update, like a line you'd see on a dashboard. I peeled it off with 2 fingers and held it away from me like it was dirty. For a second, I considered reading it twice, just to make sure my eyes weren't lying. Then I remembered how badly the night wanted me to confirm anything. I crumpled the label and stuffed it into the empty cup holder, like if I hid it, it would stop being real. At sunrise, I drove back close enough to see the building from the road, but not close enough to step inside. Cones blocked the driveway. A chain hung across it like it was closed for maintenance. From that distance, it looked like any other warehouse shut down for a broken belt or a failed inspection. That almost made me laugh. Almost. My phone rang. Blocked number. I answered on the second ring, and my throat went dry before I even heard the voice. "Don't come back," Ms. Calder said quietly. "Why?" "What was that?" I asked, trying to stay calm. There was a pause, like she was deciding how much she could say without making it worse. "Don't say your name at night," she said, like she hated having to say it. That was all she gave me. No apology, no explanation, no promise it would stop. Just a rule for the rest of my life, delivered like a warning she'd carried too long. I quit without filing anything. No HR, no complaint. I didn't want my name in their system one more time. I didn't want to prove I'd been there. I didn't want to create a paper trail that could be pulled back up by whatever had printed that label. Weeks later, I was working nights at a convenience store off a highway exit, the kind of place where the lights never turn off and the floor always smells like bleach and old coffee. I was restocking a cooler with my head down, trying to live like a normal person, when the overhead speaker crackled once. "Confirm claim," the convenience store speaker whispered, and it sounded like it was smiling. I didn't answer. I didn't even look up. I kept my eyes down and my hands moving, like I was still in that glass office staring at the concrete. The receipt printer spit paper, even though nobody bought anything. I tore it off and threw it away without reading it, and my hands did it so fast it felt automatic. After that, I stopped saying my name out loud at night. I started using a nickname, or nothing at all. The scariest part wasn't that something followed me. The scariest part was how easily I slipped into obedience, like the training had already taken.